I try and help brands find their place in the world. As Joan says, I'm an independent brand strategist. I spent the last 31 years working with organizations around the world, helping them to create what I would call authentic self-expression. So my focus has been very much on an organization's vision, purpose, and values, but the outcome is working usually with creative people to help create a brand or a corporate identity, but in a way that is authentic and that is coherent. But my talk today is really all about why having and acting on good purpose matters in uncertain times, in these volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous times. I'm going to talk about what I mean by purpose. It's I think, something that we've already heard quite a bit about. Give you some examples, but also highlight some of the challenges, why it seems quite often very hard for organizations to both have a purpose and act consistently on good purpose. And then I've been interested recently by a series of programs by a historian in the UK called Bethany Hughes, who has talked about the ideas that make us and looked back to history to see whether the ancient Greeks and people like Confucius can tell us or help us, give us maybe what I would call a moral or an ethical compass that would help us as individuals and as organizations to not only have a good purpose, but act on purpose. So what is purpose? Purpose, I think, as we've probably talked a little bit about now, is really why do you exist? What is your reason to be? What are you for? What is it that drives you as an organization? What is it that the world would miss if you didn't exist? And here are three organizations that have, I think, understandably a good purpose. The first is Lego. Their purpose is to inspire children to think creatively, to reason systematically, and to realize their potential to shape their own future. That seems like a noble purpose. IKEA, an organization we're all familiar with, and probably familiar with their purpose, to create a better everyday life for the many people. And perhaps more recently, an organization that is very much part of the 21st century, Tesla, an organization who says, they call it their mission, is to accelerate the advent of sustainable transport by bringing compelling mass-market electric cars to market as soon as possible. And we've seen how successful Tesla is, and I think we would probably all agree that it's an example of what we would see as the emergence of the purpose economy. And a book some of you may be familiar with called The Purpose Economy talks about the idea that the purpose economy is about more than just profits. It's about creating meaningful impact in service of people and the planet. So a much broader sense of why organizations exist. And it's something that we're beginning to see even the financial community start to recognize as important. Larry Fink, who runs BlackRock Investments, which is a $6 trillion fund, has recently tweeted that it's important for organizations to have a societal purpose as well as being there just to make money. So that's, I think, encouraging. But I think it's clear, and certainly my experience is, there's a big difference between having a good purpose and acting on purpose consistently. All three of those organizations have had challenges either with their business strategy, with questions about their behavior. IKEA recently about how it is potentially avoiding tax. Tesla, there is some question about whether they have the capability of actually building the number of cars they claim to want to build in time. And I think I wanted to talk a little bit about this company because it's such an important organization and it's one that affects all of us. And I think what's interesting about Facebook is in the last 2 years, we've seen Mark Zuckerberg talk about his mission, which originally, I think, was to give people the power to share and make the world more open and connected. In February of last year, he said, the most important thing we at Facebook can do is develop the social infrastructure to give people the power to build a global community that works for all of us. And just a week or so ago, he said, actually, now what we need to do is make sure that time spent on Facebook is time well spent. Therefore, he's going to change the algorithm and prioritize what he calls meaningful social interactions over relevant content because, he says, we feel a responsibility to make sure our services aren't just fun to use, but good for people's well-being. And if we do the right thing, I believe that will be good for our community and our business over the long term. And it begs the question, do we trust an organization like Facebook, which is such a dominant business? What do we think the motivations are behind this recent change or evolution of its mission? Is it altruistic? Is it that really he's here and his purpose is to kind of create human unity? Or is it more commercial? Is it that actually they think by cleaning up the site, it'll make the experience more attractive, less junk? Is it because of the scandal over fake news? Does he feel that more meaningful social connections are going to eliminate that? It's questionable. Or is it ultimately that he feels he's going to be regulated? Because this is one of, if not the biggest social platform in the world, and we as organizations, as people, probably need to have a say about what limits should be set to it. And the big question is it a publisher of content, or is it just a platform? So it occurred to me that, is there something else that organizations need to be guided by that has to do with more of a moral and an ethical compass that might help an organization like Facebook behave differently, even if it can? And as I said to you, I was really interested in this series of programs made by Bethany Hughes, where she talks about a number of qualities, and the first is character in an age of hypocrisy. What is character? It's the moral qualities that make an individual distinctive. But what does that really mean? And she claimed that our best character is when we make a positive impact on the world, which suggests that we can nourish our characters, we can affect the environments that we find ourselves in. She also then talked about the idea of harmony, and it struck me that harmony is something that we need to think about because we do seem to be living in an age of discord. And she talked about Confucius and whether Confucius can teach us anything about the idea of harmony. And she suggested that harmony comes about not through a rigid set of rules or structure, but through finding and feeling the best way for people and ideas to come together, which is a much looser and perhaps more emotive way of thinking about harmony. But she also said that the most effective acts of harmony follow Confucius. They aim to achieve a life balance, not through uniformity, but thanks to a mingling of the different. And the mingling of the different seems to be particularly important in the sorts of times we live in now, where particularly social media enables us to simply listen to the opinions that we share with other people, the echo chamber of social media, the idea that we really haven't got an inclination to take the time to listen to other people and maybe discover that although we think we have things that separate us, there's more that we share. So her view is that harmony is indeed not just a goal, but a tool and a way, perhaps, that mankind can fit with the world and also become fit for purpose. Because even at a very basic level of harmony, I think neuroscientists have found out that harmonious sounds are much more effective to people. I mean, pregnant women, if you've got harmonious sounds, rather discordant sounds, that's going to make you feel better. That's basic common sense. But then you think about the harmony of music. Something as freeform as jazz is a really interesting form of harmony, which is about mingling the different. So I think harmony in an age of discord is interesting. She also talked about the idea of narcissism, and I thought that was particularly interesting in the age of the selfie, because that's what we live in. But Aristotle, I think, was interested in the idea of narcissism not being about selfish self-love, but about self-belief. And I think the interesting thing there was that she says healthy narcissism isn't about the belief that you're good enough to do something. It is about the belief that you're good enough to do something, even self-high regard, but not at others' expense. So I think the key point here is this idea of not at others' expense. We also looked at the notion of technology in the age of artificial intelligence. Clearly, we are at a point where the potential is that what happens if the human species, if technology has the upper hand over the human species? It's a great debate, the whole question about the singularity. And I think the interesting thing there is something that Yuri Harari, who's written *Sapiens*, has said, that technology never tells us what to do with it. You need an ideology to tell you what to do with the technology. And at the moment, I think in these fast-changing times, technology is something that people, particularly in Silicon Valley, are stimulated by the ability to do it just because you can. And I don't think people question whether they should do this or not. And I think, again, you look back to somebody like Facebook, it's tied up with the kind of thrill of technology on the one hand to solve problems that in some cases are more political. It's also to do with the idea of endless growth and monetization. So I think the point of having an ideology to tell you what to do beggars the question, what kind of ideology are we talking about? And for the Greeks, it's interesting, you look back at the Greeks, the word techne meant a physical craft, but it also meant something more philosophical, which that there was a kind of rhythm and a best and a good way to live, if you will, a technique for good living. So I think Bethany's point was that technology will only be used for the good when alongside its development, we nourish an approach to life that is not just technically robust, but ethically effective for all. So again, emphasizing the us rather than the individual. Finally, she looked at the point of hubris, overwinning confidence in an age of excess, because again, we do live in an age of excess. And you could say that brands are responsible for creating excess. But the Greeks felt that there should be nothing in excess. And I think the point here is that it's fine to raise yourself up, and that you could say that human drive and ambition is part of the human condition, but not again at the expense of others. That hubris has value when it knows its own place. So, to summarize, it's clear, I think, in today's uncertain and volatile and ambiguous times, knowing what to do, it's probably going to be helpful to be guided by some sort of moral compass. Having and acting on good purpose matters more than ever, and the purpose economy is something that is helping us see the wider context of what we do. I think, as Norman was talking about, that organizations are here not just to create profits, but they're here about creating meaningful impact in service of people and the planet. How we go about doing that is something that, if we are guided by some form of moral and ethical compass that enables us to demonstrate our best character, to see harmony as a way to fit with the world and also become fit for purpose, having self-belief but not at others' expense, being technically robust but ethically effective for all, and yes, raising ourselves up but not at the expense of others. Because I think the challenge is, if we don't act with integrity, there is a risk at the moment that the political situation we see in a place like America at the moment is that there's the chance that, yes, there are rules and there are norms and there are checks and balances, but ultimately it's down to people's integrity and how they behave that matters. Otherwise, there is a risk that democracies can quietly die. So I guess my challenge to everybody is, let's start your impossible. I was struck by this poster recently, which is for the upcoming Olympic Games. But the thing that Enric ended up talking about, the developing oneself vertically, which seems like a very noble ambition, may seem impossible at one level, but surely within our own capabilities, particularly if we see ourselves in the wider context of not a you or me world, but a you and me world and an us world. Thank you.